Book 9, Part 1 of Laws by Plato, translated by Benjamin Jowett. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Book 9. Next to all the matters which have preceded in the natural order of legislation will come suits of law. Of suits, those which relate to agriculture have been already described, but the more important have not been described. Having mentioned them severally under their usual names, we will proceed to say what punishments are to be inflicted for each offence, and who are to be the judges of them. Cleinias: Very good. Athenian: There is a sense of disgrace in legislating, as we are about to do, for all the details of crime in a state which, as we say, is to be well regulated, will be perfectly adapted to the practice of virtue. To assume that in such a state there will arise some one who will be guilty of crimes as heinous as any which are ever perpetuated in other states, and that we must legislate for him by anticipation, and threaten and make laws against him if he should arise, in order to deter him and punish his acts, under the idea that he will arise, this, as I was saying, is in a manner disgraceful. Yet, seeing that we are not like the ancient legislators, who gave laws to heroes and sons of gods, being, according to the popular belief, themselves the offspring of the gods, and legislating for others who were also the children of divine parents, but that we are only men who are legislating for the sons of men, there is no uncharitableness in apprehending that some one of our citizens may be like a seed which has touched the ox's horn, having a heart so hard that it cannot be softened any more than those seeds can be softened by fire. Among our citizens there may be those who cannot be subdued by all the strength of the laws, and for their sake, though an ungracious task, I will proclaim my first law about the robbing of temples, in case any one should dare to commit such a crime. I do not expect or imagine that any well brought up citizen will ever take the infection, but their servants and strangers' servants may be guilty of many impieties. And with a view to them especially, and yet not without a provident eye to the weakness of human nature generally, I will proclaim the law about robbers of temples and similar incurable or almost incurable criminals. Having already agreed that such enactments ought always to have a short prelude, we may speak to the criminal whom some tormenting desire by night and by day tempts to go and rob a temple, the fewest possible words of admonition and exhortation. O sir, we will say to him, the impulse which moves you to rob temples is not an ordinary human malady, nor yet a visitation of heaven, but a madness which is begotten in a man from ancient and unexpiated crimes of his race, an ever recurring curse. Against this you must guard with all your might. And how you are to guard we will explain to you. When any such thought comes into your mind, go and perform expiations. Go as a suppliant to the temples of the gods who avert evils. Go to the society of those who are called good men among you. Hear them tell, and yourself try to repeat after them, that every man should honour the noble and the just. Fly from the company of the wicked, fly and turn not back. And if your disorder is lightened by these remedies, well and good; but if not, then acknowledge death to be nobler than life, and depart hence. Such are the preludes which we sing to all who have thoughts of unholy and treasonable actions, and to him who hearkens to them the law has nothing to say. But to him who is disobedient when the prelude is over, cry with a loud voice. He who is taken in the act of robbing temples, if he be a slave or stranger, shall have his evil deed engraven on his face and hands, and shall be beaten with as many stripes as may seem good to the judges, and be cast naked beyond the borders of the land. And if he suffers this punishment, he will probably return to his right mind and be improved. For no penalty which the law inflicts is designed for evil, but always makes him who suffers either better or not so much worse as he would have been. But if any citizen be found guilty of any great or unmentionable wrong, either in relation to the gods, or his parents, or the state, let the judge deem him to be incurable, remembering that after receiving such an excellent education and training from youth upward, he has not abstained from the greatest of crimes. His punishment shall be death, which to him will be the least of evils, and his example will benefit others if he perish ingloriously and be cast beyond the borders of the land. But let his children and family, if they avoid the ways of their father, have glory, and let honourable mention be made of them, as having nobly and manfully escaped out of evil into good. None of them should have their goods confiscated to the state, for the lots of the citizens ought always to continue the same and equal. Touching the exaction of penalties, when a man appears to have done anything which deserves a fine, he shall pay the fine, if he have anything in excess of the lot which is assigned to him, but more than that he shall not pay. And to secure exactness, let the guardians of the law refer to the registers, and inform the judges of the precise truth, in order that none of the lots may go uncultivated for want of money. But if any one seems to deserve a greater penalty, let him undergo a long and public imprisonment, and be dishonoured, unless some of his friends are willing to be surety for him, and liberate him by assisting him to pay the fine. No criminal shall go unpunished, not even for a single offence, nor if he have fled the country; but let the penalty be according to his deserts, death, or bonds, or blows, or degrading places of sitting or standing, or removal to some temple on the borders of the land. Or let him pay fines, as we said before. In cases of death, let the judges be the guardians of the law, and a court selected by merit from the last year's magistrates. But how the causes are to be brought into court, how the summonses are to be served, and the like, these things may be left to the younger generation of legislators to determine. The manner of voting we must determine ourselves. Let the vote be given openly, but before they come to the vote, let the judges sit in order of seniority over against plaintiff and defendant, and let all the citizens who can spare time hear and take a serious interest in listening to such causes. First of all, the plaintiff shall make one speech, and then the defendant shall make another, and after the speeches have been made, the eldest judge shall begin to examine the parties, and proceed to make an adequate inquiry into what has been said, and after the oldest has spoken, the rest shall proceed in order to examine either party as to what he finds defective in the evidence, whether of statement or omission. And he who has nothing to ask shall hand over the examination to another, and on so much of what has been said as is to the purpose all the judges shall set their seals, and place the writings on the altar of Hestia. On the next day they shall meet again, and in like manner put their questions, and go through the cause, and again set their seals upon the evidence. And when they have 3 times done this, and have had witnesses and evidence enough, they shall each of them give a holy vote, after promising by Hestia that they will decide justly and truly to the utmost of their power, and so they shall put an end to the suit. Next, after what relates to the Gods, follows what relates to the dissolution of the state. Whoever, by permitting a man to power, enslaves the laws, and subjects the city to factions, using violence and stirring up sedition contrary to law, him we will deem the greatest enemy of the whole state. But he who takes no part in such proceedings, and being one of the chief magistrates of the state has no knowledge of treason, or having knowledge of it by reason of cowardice does not interfere on behalf of his country, such an one we must consider nearly as bad. Every man who is worth anything will inform the magistrates, and bring the conspirator to trial for making a violent and illegal attempt to change the government. The judges of such cases shall be the same as of the robbers of temples, and let the whole proceeding be carried on in the same way, and the vote of the majority condemn to death. But let there be a general rule that the disgrace and punishment of the father is not to be visited on the children, except in the case of some one whose father, grandfather, and great grandfather have successively undergone the penalty of death. Such persons the city shall send away with all their possessions to the city and country of their ancestors, retaining only and wholly their appointed lot. And out of the citizens who have more than one son of not less than 10 years of age, they shall select 10 whom their father or grandfather by the mother's or father's side shall appoint, and let them send to Delphi the names of those who are selected, and him whom the God chooses they shall establish as heir of the house which has failed. And may he have better fortune than his predecessors. Cleinias. Very good. Athenian. Once more, let there be a third general law respecting the judges who are to give judgment, and the manner of conducting suits against those who are tried on an accusation of treason. And as concerning the remaining or departure of their descendants, there shall be one law for all three, for the traitor, and the robber of temples, and the subverter by violence of the laws of the state. For a thief, whether he steal much or little, let there be one law, and one punishment for all alike. In the first place, let him pay double the amount of the theft if he be convicted, and if he have so much over and above the allotment; if he have not, he shall be bound until he pay the penalty, or persuade him who has obtained the sentence against him to forgive him. But if a person be convicted of a theft against the state, then if he can persuade the city, or if he will pay back twice the amount of the theft, he shall be set free from his bonds. Cleinias. What makes you say, Stranger, that a theft is all one, whether the thief may have taken much or little, and either from sacred or secular places? And these are not the only differences in thefts. Seeing then that they are of many kinds, ought not the legislator to adapt himself to them, and impose upon them entirely different penalties? Athenian. Excellent. I was running on too fast, Cleinias, and you impinged upon me and brought me to my senses, reminding me of what indeed had occurred to my mind already, that legislation was never yet rightly worked out, as I may say in passing. Do you remember the image in which I likened the men for whom laws are now made to slaves who are doctored by slaves? For of this you may be very sure, that if one of those empirical physicians who practise medicine without science were to come upon the gentleman physician talking to his gentleman patient, and using the language almost of philosophy, beginning at the beginning of the disease, and discoursing about the whole nature of the body, he would burst into a hearty laugh. He would say what most of those who are called doctors always have at their tongue's end. Foolish fellow, he would say, you are not healing the sick man, but you are educating him, and he does not want to be made a doctor, but to get well. Cleinias. And would he not be right? Athenian. Perhaps he would, and he might remark upon us that he who discourses about laws, as we are now doing, is giving the citizens education and not laws. That would be rather a telling observation. Cleinias. Very true. Athenian. But we are fortunate. Cleinias. In what way? ATHENIAN: Inasmuch as we are not compelled to give laws, but we may take into consideration every form of government, and ascertain what is best and what is most needful, and how they may both be carried into execution, and we may also, if we please, at this very moment choose what is best, or, if we prefer, what is most necessary, what shall we do? CLEINIAS: There is something ridiculous, Stranger, in our proposing such an alternative, as if we were legislators, simply bound under some great necessity which cannot be deferred to the morrow. But we, as I may by the grace of heaven affirm, like gatherers of stones or beginners of some composite work, may gather a heap of materials, and out of this at our leisure select what is suitable for our projected construction. Let us then suppose ourselves to be at leisure, not of necessity building, but rather like men who are partly providing materials and partly putting them together. And we may truly say that some of our laws, like stones, are already fixed in their places, and others lie at hand. ATHENIAN: Certainly in that case, Cleinias, our view of law will be more in accordance with nature. For there is another matter affecting legislators which I must earnestly entreat you to consider. CLEINIAS: What is it? ATHENIAN: There are many writings to be found in cities, and among them there are discourses composed by legislators as well as by other persons. CLEINIAS: To be sure. ATHENIAN: Shall we give heed rather to the writings of those others, poets and the like, who either in metre or out of metre have recorded their advice about the conduct of life, and not to the writings of legislators, or shall we give heed to them above all? CLEINIAS: Yes, to them far above all others. ATHENIAN: And ought the legislator alone among writers to withhold his opinion about the beautiful, the good, and the just, and not to teach what they are and how they are to be pursued by those who intend to be happy? CLEINIAS: Certainly not. ATHENIAN: And is it disgraceful for Homer and Tyrtaeus and other poets to lay down evil precepts in their writings respecting life and the pursuits of men, but not so disgraceful for Lycurgus and Solon and others who were legislators as well as writers? Is it not true that of all the writings to be found in cities, those which relate to laws, when you unfold and read them, ought to be by far the noblest and the best? And should not other writings either agree with them, or if they disagree, be deemed ridiculous? We should consider whether the laws of states ought not to have the character of loving and wise parents, rather than of tyrants and masters who command and threaten, and after writing their decrees on walls go their ways; and whether in discoursing of laws we should not take the gentler view of them, which may or may not be attainable. At any rate, we will show our readiness to entertain such a view, and be prepared to undergo whatever may be the result, and may the result be good, and if God be gracious it will be good. CLEINIAS: Excellent; let us do as you say. ATHENIAN: Then we will now consider accurately, as we proposed, what relates to robbers of temples, and all kinds of thefts and offences in general; and we must not be annoyed if in the course of legislation we have enacted some things, and have not made up our minds about some others, for as yet we are not legislators, but we may soon be. Let us, if you please, consider these matters. CLEINIAS: By all means. ATHENIAN: Concerning all things honourable and just, let us then endeavour to ascertain how far we are consistent with ourselves, and how far we are inconsistent, and how far the many, from whom at any rate we should profess a desire to differ, agree and disagree among themselves. CLEINIAS: What are the inconsistencies which you observe in us? ATHENIAN: I will endeavour to explain. If I am not mistaken, we are all agreed that justice and just men and things and actions are all fair; and if a person were to maintain that just men, even when they are deformed in body, are still perfectly beautiful in respect of the excellent justice of their minds, no one would say that there was any inconsistency in this. CLEINIAS: They would be quite right. Athenian, perhaps. But let us consider further that if all things which are just are fair and honourable, in the term all we must include just sufferings, which are the correlatives of just actions. Cleinias, and what is the inference? Athenian, the inference is that a just action, in partaking of the just, partakes also in the same degree of the fair and honourable. Cleinias, certainly. Athenian, and must not a suffering which partakes of the just principle be admitted to be in the same degree fair and honourable, if the argument is consistently carried out? Cleinias, true. Athenian, but then if we admit suffering to be just and yet dishonourable, and the term dishonourable is applied to justice, will not the just and the honourable disagree? Cleinias, what do you mean? Athenian, a thing not difficult to understand. The laws which have been already enacted would seem to announce principles directly opposed to what we are saying. Cleinias, to what? Athenian, we had enacted, if I am not mistaken, that the robber of temples and he who was the enemy of law and order might justly be put to death. And we were proceeding to make divers other enactments of a similar nature, but we stopped short, because we saw that these sufferings are infinite in number and degree, and that they are at once the most just and also the most dishonourable of all sufferings. And if this be true, are not the just and the honourable at one time all the same, and at another time in the most diametrical opposition? Cleinias, such appears to be the case. Athenian, in this discordant and inconsistent fashion does the language of the many rend asunder the honourable and just. Cleinias, very true, Stranger. Athenian, then now, Cleinias, let us see how far we ourselves are consistent about these matters. Cleinias, consistent in what? Athenian, I think that I have clearly stated in the former part of the discussion, but if I did not, let me now state. Cleinias, what? Athenian, that all bad men are always involuntarily bad. And from this I must proceed to draw a further inference. Cleinias, what is it? Athenian, that the unjust man may be bad, but that he is bad against his will. Now that an action which is voluntary should be done involuntarily is a contradiction. Wherefore he who maintains that injustice is involuntary will deem that the unjust does injustice involuntarily. I too admit that all men do injustice involuntarily. And if any contentious or disputatious person says that men are unjust against their will, and yet that many do injustice willingly, I do not agree with him. But then how can I avoid being inconsistent with myself if you, Cleinias, and you, Megillus, say to me, well, Stranger, if all this be as you say, how about legislating for the city of the Magnetes? Shall we legislate or not? What do you advise? Certainly we will, I should reply. Then will you determine for them what are voluntary and what are involuntary crimes? And shall we make the punishments greater of voluntary errors and crimes and less for the involuntary? Or shall we make the punishment of all to be alike, under the idea that there is no such thing as voluntary crime? Cleinias, very good, Stranger, and what shall we say in answer to these objections? Athenian, that is a very fair question. In the first place, let us, Cleinias, do what? Athenian, let us remember what has been well said by us already, that our ideas of justice are in the highest degree confused and contradictory. Bearing this in mind, let us proceed to ask ourselves once more whether we have discovered a way out of the difficulty. Have we ever determined in what respect these two classes of actions differ from one another? For in all states and by all legislators whatsoever, two kinds of actions have been distinguished, the one voluntary, the other involuntary, and they have legislated about them accordingly. But shall this new word of ours, like an oracle of God, be only spoken, and get away without giving any explanation or verification of itself? How can a word not understood be the basis of legislation? Impossible. Before proceeding to legislate, then, we must prove that they are two, and what is the difference between them, that when we impose the penalty upon either, every one may understand our proposal, and be able in some way to judge whether the penalty is fitly or unfitly inflicted. CLEINIAS: I agree with you, Stranger, for one of two things is certain: either we must not say that all unjust acts are involuntary, or we must show the meaning and truth of this statement. ATHENIAN: of these two alternatives, the one is quite intolerable. Not to speak what I believe to be the truth would be to me unlawful and unholy. But if acts of injustice cannot be divided into voluntary and involuntary, I must endeavour to find some other distinction between them. CLEINIAS: very true, Stranger; there cannot be two opinions among us upon that point. ATHENIAN: reflect then. There are hurts of various kinds done by the citizens to one another in the intercourse of life, affording plentiful examples both of the voluntary and involuntary. CLEINIAS: certainly. ATHENIAN: I would not have any one suppose that all these hurts are injuries, and that these injuries are of two kinds, one voluntary and the other involuntary. For the involuntary hurts of all men are quite as many and as great as the voluntary. And please to consider whether I am right or quite wrong in what I am going to say, for I deny, Cleinias and Megillus, that he who harms another involuntarily does him an injury involuntarily. Nor should I legislate about such an act under the idea that I am legislating for an involuntary injury; but I should rather say that such a hurt, whether great or small, is not an injury at all. And on the other hand, if I am right, when a benefit is wrongly conferred, the author of the benefit may often be said to injure. For I maintain, O my friends, that the mere giving or taking away of anything is not to be described either as just or unjust, but the legislator has to consider whether mankind do good or harm to one another out of a just principle and intention. On the distinction between injustice and hurt he must fix his eye, and when there is hurt he must, as far as he can, make the hurt good by law, and save that which is ruined, and raise up that which has fallen, and make that which is dead or wounded whole. And when compensation has been given for injustice, the law must always seek to win over the doers and sufferers of the several hurts from feelings of enmity to those of friendship. CLEINIAS: very good. ATHENIAN: then as to unjust hurts, and gains also, supposing the injustice to bring gain, of these we may heal as many as are capable of being healed, regarding them as diseases of the soul, and the cure of injustice will take the following direction. CLEINIAS: what direction? ATHENIAN: when any one commits any injustice, small or great, the law will admonish and compel him either never at all to do the like again, or never voluntarily, or at any rate in a far less degree, and he must in addition pay for the hurt. Whether the end is to be attained by word or action, with pleasure or pain, by giving or taking away privileges, by means of fines or gifts, or in whatsoever way the law shall proceed to make a man hate injustice, and love or not hate the nature of the just, this is quite the noblest work of law. But if the legislator sees any one who is incurable, for him he will appoint a law and a penalty. He knows quite well that to such men themselves there is no profit in the continuance of their lives, and that they would do a double good to the rest of mankind if they would take their departure, inasmuch as they would be an example to other men not to offend. and they would relieve the city of bad citizens. In such cases, and in such cases only, the legislator ought to inflict death as the punishment of offences. CLEINIAS: What you have said appears to me to be very reasonable, but will you favour me by stating a little more clearly the difference between hurt and injustice, and the various complications of the voluntary and involuntary which enter into them? ATHENIAN: I will endeavour to do as you wish. Concerning the soul, thus much would be generally said and allowed, that one element in her nature is passion, which may be described either as a state or a part of her, and is hard to be striven against and contended with, and by irrational force overturns many things. CLEINIAS: Very true. ATHENIAN: And pleasure is not the same with passion, but has an opposite power, working her will by persuasion and by the force of deceit in all things. CLEINIAS: Quite true. ATHENIAN: A man may truly say that ignorance is a third cause of crimes. Ignorance, however, may be conveniently divided by the legislator into two sorts. There is simple ignorance, which is the source of lighter offences, and double ignorance, which is accompanied by a conceit of wisdom; and he who is under the influence of the latter fancies that he knows all about matters of which he knows nothing. This second kind of ignorance, when possessed of power and strength, will be held by the legislator to be the source of great and monstrous crimes, but when attended with weakness will only result in the errors of children and old men, and these he will treat as errors, and will make laws accordingly for those who commit them, which will be the mildest and most merciful of all laws. CLEINIAS: You are perfectly right. ATHENIAN: We all of us remark of one man that he is superior to pleasure and passion, and of another that he is inferior to them, and this is true. CLEINIAS: Certainly. ATHENIAN: But no one was ever yet heard to say that one of us is superior and another inferior to ignorance. CLEINIAS: Very true. ATHENIAN: We are speaking of motives which incite men to the fulfilment of their will, although an individual may be often drawn by them in opposite directions at the same time. CLEINIAS: Yes, often. ATHENIAN: And now I can define to you clearly and without ambiguity what I mean by the just and unjust, according to my notion of them. When anger and fear and pleasure and pain and jealousies and desires tyrannize over the soul, whether they do any harm or not, I call all this injustice. But when the opinion of the best, in whatever part of human nature, states or individuals may suppose that to dwell, has dominion in the soul, and orders the life of every man, even if it be sometimes mistaken, yet what is done in accordance therewith, and the principle in individuals which obeys this rule, and is best for the whole life of man, is to be called just, although the hurt done by mistake is thought by many to be involuntary injustice. Leaving the question of names, about which we are not going to quarrel, and having already delineated three sources of error, we may begin by recalling them somewhat more vividly to our memory. One of them was of the painful sort which we denominate anger and fear. CLEINIAS: Quite right. ATHENIAN: There was a second consisting of pleasures and desires, and a third of hopes, which aimed at true opinion about the best. The latter being subdivided into three, we now get 5 sources of actions, and for these 5 we will make laws of 2 kinds. CLEINIAS: What are the 2 kinds? ATHENIAN: There is one kind of actions done by violence and in the light of day, and another kind of actions which are done in darkness and with secret deceit, or sometimes both with violence and deceit. The laws concerning these last ought to have a character of severity. CLEINIAS: Naturally. ATHENIAN: And now let us return from this digression and complete the work of legislation. Laws have been already enacted by us concerning the robbers of the gods, and concerning traitors, and also concerning those who corrupt the laws for the purpose of subverting the government. A man may very likely commit some of these crimes, either in a state of madness, or when affected by disease, or under the influence of extreme old age, or in a fit of childish wantonness, himself no better than a child. And if this be made evident to the judges elected to try the cause, on the appeal of the criminal or his advocate, and he be judged to have been in this state when he committed the offence, he shall simply pay for the hurt which he may have done to another, but he shall be exempt from other penalties, unless he have slain some one, and have on his hands the stain of blood. And in that case he shall go to another land and country, and there dwell for a year, and if he return before the expiration of the time which the law appoints, or even set his foot at all on his native land, he shall be bound by the guardians of the law in the public prison for 2 years, and then go free. Having begun to speak of homicide, let us endeavour to lay down laws concerning every different kind of homicide, and first of all concerning violent and involuntary homicides. If any one in an athletic contest and at the public games involuntarily kills a friend, and he dies either at the time or afterwards of the blows which he has received, or if the like misfortune happens to any one in war, or military exercises, or mimic contests of which the magistrates enjoin the practice, whether with or without arms, when he has been purified according to the law brought from Delphi relating to these matters, he shall be innocent. And so in the case of physicians, if their patient dies against their will, they shall be held guiltless by the law. And if one slay another with his own hand, but unintentionally, whether he be unarmed, or have some instrument or dart in his hand, or if he kill him by administering food or drink, or by the application of fire or cold, or by suffocating him, whether he do the deed by his own hand, or by the agency of others, he shall be deemed the agent, and shall suffer one of the following penalties. If he kill the slave of another in the belief that he is his own, he shall bear the master of the dead man harmless from loss, or shall pay a penalty of twice the value of the dead man, which the judges shall assess. But purifications must be used greater and more numerous than for those who committed homicide at the games. What they are to be, the interpreters whom the God appoints shall be authorized to declare. And if a man kills his own slave, when he has been purified according to law, he shall be quit of the homicide. And if a man kills a free man unintentionally, he shall undergo the same purification as he did who killed the slave. But let him not forget also a tale of olden time, which is to this effect. He who has suffered a violent end when newly dead, if he has had the soul of a free man in life, is angry with the author of his death, and being himself full of fear and panic by reason of his violent end, when he sees his murderer walking about in his own accustomed haunts, he is stricken with terror and becomes disordered, and this disorder of him, aided by the guilty recollection of the other, is communicated by him with overwhelming force to the murderer and his deeds. Wherefore also the murderer must go out of the way of his victim for the entire period of a year, and not himself be found in any spot which was familiar to him throughout the country. And if the dead man be a stranger, the homicide shall be kept from the country of the stranger during a like period. If any one voluntarily obeys this law, the next of kin to the deceased, seeing all that has happened, shall take pity on him, and make peace with him, and show him all gentleness. But if any one is disobedient, and either ventures to go to any of the temples and sacrifice unpurified, or will not continue in exile during the appointed time, the next of kin to the deceased shall proceed against him for murder. And if he be convicted, every part of his punishment shall be doubled. And if the next of kin do not proceed against the perpetrator of the crime, then the pollution shall be deemed to fall upon his own head. The murdered man will fix the guilt upon his kinsman, and he who has a mind to proceed against him may compel him to be absent from his country during 5 years according to law. If a stranger unintentionally kill a stranger who is dwelling in this city, he who likes shall prosecute the cause according to the same rules. If he be a metic, let him be absent for a year, or if he be an entire stranger, in addition to the purification, whether he have slain a stranger or a metic or a citizen, he shall be banished for life from the country which is in possession of our laws. And if he return contrary to law, let the guardians of the law punish him with death. And let them hand over his property, if he have any, to him who is next of kin to the sufferer. And if he be wrecked and driven on the coast against his will, he shall take up his abode on the sea shore, wetting his feet in the sea, and watching for an opportunity of sailing. But if he be brought by land, and is not his own master, let the magistrate, whom he first comes across in the city, release him and send him unharmed over the border. If any one slays a free man with his own hand, and the deed be done in passion in the case of such actions, we must begin by making a distinction. For a deed is done from passion either when men suddenly, and without intention to kill, cause the death of another by blows and the like on a momentary impulse, and are sorry for the deed immediately afterwards; or again, when after having been insulted in deed or word, men pursue revenge, and kill a person intentionally, and are not sorry for the act. And therefore we must assume that these homicides are of two kinds, both of them arising from passion, which may be justly said to be in a mean between the voluntary and involuntary. At the same time, they are neither of them anything more than a likeness or shadow of either. He who treasures up his anger and avenges himself, not immediately and at the moment, but with insidious design, and after an interval, is like the voluntary. But he who does not treasure up his anger, and takes vengeance on the instant, and without malice prepense, approaches to the involuntary. And yet even he is not altogether involuntary, but is only the image or shadow of the involuntary. Wherefore about homicides committed in hot blood there is a difficulty in determining whether in legislating we shall reckon them as voluntary or as partly involuntary. The best and truest view is to regard them respectively as likenesses only of the voluntary and involuntary, and to distinguish them accordingly as they are done with or without premeditation. And we should make the penalties heavier for those who commit homicide with angry premeditation, and lighter for those who do not premeditate, but smite upon the instant. For that which is like a greater evil should be punished more severely, and that which is like a less evil should be punished less severely. This shall be the rule of our laws. Cleinias. Certainly. End of Book 9, Part 1.